Hello, everybody, and welcome to another RCT2 review stream. Today is an inside look day, so that means we're going to look at one of the parks that I built and kind of talk through the details and some of the planning that went behind the scenes for the park. This one in particular is Kayte Ridge. This was a head-to-head I think, park made by myself and Geewhizz, and a winning park at that, just barely. But this park, I think, in some sense, can be kind of credited with kicking off the realism movement in the game, or at least on New Element, that kind of carries through to today. So I'm pretty proud of that, for one. But yeah, I'm happy with this park still, even though it does have its struggles, as we'll see. But let's jump in. So a lot of this architecture was done by Geewhizz, and it's actually pretty easy to see the stuff that I did versus the stuff that he did, mostly because his looks better than mine did. So we have our little ticket booth and entrance area into an entrance plaza on this side, and then our ticket booth on this side. Actually kind of large and also pretty plain as far as this goes. We have a little restroom on the side. I think doing this again, I'd certainly make this more interesting. At least put a tower here, put a couple of towers on either side here. Just give it some height because it is kind of low. But a lot of the little quarter detailing, it's also kind of plain as far as color goes, and I think you'll see that as somewhat of a running theme through the space. But nice little flower bed and fountain here that's just not a square, which is always kind of nice. Anyway, so once you get through the ticket booth, of which there are far too many ticket booths for this size of a park, we get to our first little ride here. So this is Thunder Canyon. This is a rapids ride, and honestly, this was around the time that I was doing the Watkins Woods Park and some of the other earlier ones, and a lot of my parks were kind of just variations on a theme. And this one is, if you go look at the rapids ride in Watkins Woods, is pretty much the same thing. It's got this sort of tunnel thing and a couple of drops with the waterfalls and everything, and then come around back to the station, and it's fine. I like it well enough. This was back to when it was still kind of the in thing to do little quarter tile queue lines and exit paths and everything, and not open the park to peeps. I do have a peepable version in my files, and I'm not quite sure when that was a thing. So I'm sure either I did or somebody made it peepable at one point, which definitely looks a lot better, but I didn't want to go through and rehide all the entrances. But I do like this. It's kind of pleasant. Has nicely landscaped around it. A little water chute area here where you can spray the guests as they come down. And it's a pretty small ride, but the size of the park really kind of dictates that. Okay, so up here we have the carousel. So this is the Midway Carousel on, I guess, what we consider the Midway, which is sort of kind of this. Nice little canopy over top, covers the queue as well, so it's sort of a 4x4. These canopies for the carousels always end up being a little bit tall, but part of the reason that is for the clearances of the carousel so it doesn't glitch through. And then part of it too, I think, is that it allows you to see the carousel. I mean, the carousel certainly has its own covering, but it's just not necessarily sufficient as far as a lot of parks go. So I get the coverings, and I kind of like to see them. And usually the height is a little more acceptable being tall like that. I am a pretty big fan of this little planter here, the stair stepped up with the red, the orange, and the yellow on the way up to kind of the main upper level. And then also this restaurant here, which is something G did. I'm a fan of this little bridge and then the stairs up underneath of it, and then our little raised seating area here. I feel like it's kind of a neat dining experience to sit up at the top and kind of look around at each of the things. So we didn't do interiors. We should have, I think, especially for a park this small and sort of sparse. But I'm guessing the restaurant is on the top, the gift shop is on the bottom, as perhaps you'd see in a real park, since there's really not any kind of entrance structures as it stands. All right, so down here we have the Tornado Twister, just a standard scrambler ride, but we did want to go through and add the little operator booths and things like that. So that was the idea, was to get something a little more realistically detailed than you see at a lot of parks, or a lot of RCT parks at the time. And I think I mean, for the time we did that. I mean, looking back, it's now woefully not that great. But at the time, I feel like it held up pretty well. A little game stall here. This is something that I built kind of undetailed, undecorated, perhaps, but I did want just to have those sorts of structures in here. Down along the waterfront, which I was a pretty big fan of this seawall kind of thing with the brick and everything. I'm not quite sure why I didn't continue the brick pieces onto this side here, but I do like that. I like this little seating area down here, even though there's no restaurant nearby. I think that's a pet peeve of mine nowadays. If you have a seating area, you ought to have at least a cart or a restaurant or something, because there's really no point in having that if you don't have food to go sit and do it or use it for. Anyway, we have our Hoos top spin here. This is jackhammer out here, stuck out into the water, which I do kind of like. And then over on this side, we have our little restaurant here. So this is Aunt B's Southern Grill. Again, this is something that lifts pretty much one for one, at least architecturally, out of Watkins Woods and some other stuff. So I was pretty proud of this building. At the time, this felt super detailed to me, which always makes me laugh a little bit looking back at it. But I was pretty happy with this building, and you'll see this sort of theme of kind of, I like to call it the layer cake approach, where we have base, a wall, a base, a wall, some kind of trim, and then some kind of secondary trim. I mean, such as here, base, wall, base, trim, secondary trim, all the way up. But anyway, so down here you get this great view of the big coaster over here, which we'll look at last, just because it's probably the highlight of the park, before you can kind of work your way up the big staircase here to the upper level. We have another little building here, which Geewhizz made. And then over here we have our lightning rod and the turbo drop and the power space shot. I do like when they're offset a little bit like this rather than side by side. I wish we would have done some kind of a custom top to it, but we did not. So wrapping around to this side, we've got our little vintage cars, which pretty standard deal. Not a whole lot of theming aside from plants and some fences and a little covering here and there, but you know, it was all right, held up well enough. To the first coaster here, which is Rebel. I have this tagged as a John Allen wooden coaster, which I can kind of see it. The banking is hit or miss to be John Allen. His banking was typically pretty low, but it was there, so you can kind of take it or leave it. I took it, as you can see, but just to help out with the overall look of it, I thought it looked a little better with that. But I wanted to have an out and back layout that still had a little bit of curvature in it, so that we could put some things around it. So this is what we went with here. So let's take a ride on this guy. Let's keep him up. We'll lift it quickly. There we go. We'll go down our first drop here, up and over this first airtime hill, and then over the speed hill right here underneath the structure. Through this first pretty fast turnaround, a little bit faster than most of the John Allens you might know. Over top of that second airtime hill, or third, I guess, and then around the corner through the diagonals here, have an airtime hill on here, turn around, and then into the brakes. So pretty simple, not too much going on there, but not too awful. Have a transfer track, but I didn't put it in, so that's an oops right there. Station building, pretty all right, although I kind of cringe a little bit at these deco wall pieces now, and the big circular windows, not necessarily the finest of looks. Here's something that we built right towards the end. So this is Haunted Mansion. So this is something that I did the layout and the architecture for. Again, no interior theming, although I kind of wish that I had. But I was pretty proud of the structure itself. There's not a lot to it, but I thought it looked nice enough. And then we have our monorail going around it. You can kind of see over top of things, which I liked doing these sort of long spans with the additional column up under the pipe alongside the monorail beam. I thought it gave it kind of a nice look. Alrighty, and then we get up to a couple of bits that Geewhizz did. So these little restrooms here, kind of a copy of what happened here, just a little larger. And then this theater, which I kind of liked. So this was um, something he put together, which I thought worked really well. Really working at that quarter tile scale, so all the different paths and things in here at the quarter tile. And then the structure itself is kind of nice with the little back of house area here with the loading dock door and everything. That was nice enough. Another similar building to the one down below. This one is the Corner Store Souvenirs, but pretty similar to this guy down there. Over here we have our Enterprise, Cyclone, another Hoos Enterprise, and then over here the Dodgems bumper cars, again with this quarter queue line, which I do like the look of the quarter queue line, at least from a peep scale standpoint, especially if you're looking at like early Cedar Fair parks or things like that. It fits the scale of the peep very well, but because you can't get a peep to walk on the quarter tile, it just doesn't really work when you have the peep. So I think the trade-off, as far as I'm concerned, I will almost always take peeps over not nowadays. While I like the look of the quarter tile, and it would be great if that could ever become a thing, but since it's not, I kind of avoid this now. But anyway, good structure here. Nice work from Geewhizz on that one. All right, now we head back to this side here. We have a couple of little bits and pieces, so we're going to jump onto the other side here and look at the Schwarzkopf. This is Wasp. So this is meant to be a Schwarzkopf Shuttle Loop, and I must say I did not do an ideal job at this. We do have catwalk. We don't necessarily have the brakes on either side, so typically you hack looping coaster brakes along the launch track here, and it kind of looks like the brakes on the Schwarzkopf coaster. I do have the little launch room here, so this is a flywheel launch. So there's two varieties of this in real life. There's the weight drop and the flywheel model. The weight drop model has a big tube up here underneath the front tower that has a giant weight in it, and essentially it drops a weight and pulls the train along on a winch, and that is what launches the thing over. Scale-wise, this isn't quite right. It probably needs to be a good 10 tiles longer, I would say. So this launch track probably needs a good 4 tiles, and then there's also a pretty substantial space behind the launch or behind the station in real life that has a little bit of a gap before our hill here. But we were pressed for space a little bit, and I didn't know what I was doing as much back then. So I think that now we end up with this, and it's also a 6-car train. It should be a 7-car, but that's where I've learned and certainly grown as a player, I would say. Station is pretty darn generic, pretty decent little square here with our ticker roof and things. I mean, this to me was generic general realism that I thought looked nice at the time, and it still looks fine. I mean, it's pleasant enough. I did like the little queue line here and how it kind of wraps its way all the way through the little trees back here and everything. It felt very kind of intimate in that space. I mean, looking back, it still has a little bit of that nostalgia charm to it, but it also has a little bit of under detail, which I'm not a huge fan of. But you know, live and learn with all that. So up here we have our monorail and the Skyway with our two colors of trains here. So single station on this one, just a trip around the park. When I do transport rides like monorails and railroads, I try not to have a lot of height variation. Railroads especially, but monorails too, just because I think it looks far better when you don't have hills and these things are struggling up those little hills. So there's a couple of little bumps here and there just to get it a little bit back where it needs to be, but for the most part I do try and avoid that from a just gameplay standpoint, from a visual perspective. I did like this little station here with the little underside that has the vending machine and some of the entrance and exit stairs and things. And then on the other side here we have our street side market and let's see, street side shop, and then the restrooms in here, and then some of the game stalls in here. This was kind of copying a lot of Cedar Fair stuff at the time, or things that they were doing. pretty under detailed, again following our layer cake approach, which I don't necessarily recommend, but it kind of worked okay to offset this coaster over here. So this was the big thing, and honestly what we built first in the park. We were kind of going back and forth between a lot of these, and I ended up settling on this layout that I'm honestly still really proud of. I love this layout. So this is Renegade, taking a Storm Runner approach to the layout from Hershey Park, with the top hat, with a flying snake dive, and the big Sidewinder implement element. Renegade is also one of the names that Hershey threw around for naming Storm Runner back in the day. It was Renegade, Storm Runner, and Steel Stampede, and there was a contest online that you could vote for which one you wanted, and Storm Runner won out. But I was always a fan of Renegade, so that's the one that I chose for this guy. So you were kind of watching this go through, and like I said, I'm still really happy with this layout. The JA Giga Looping trains had just come out pretty recently, and these were sort of the only trains that you could use to build inverting things that could kind of do whatever. So this was sort of the go-to choice for everything. So here we have our launch up to a top hat that dove off the side of the cliff down by the water, which I thought was pretty neat. Top speed way down here. Through this turnaround, and then our flying snake dive, which is a roll plus a half roll down to this vertical dive through the tunnel and up and into this implement element. Another helix here. We're going to spin around and see the banked airtime hill here, and then another helix here, opening up into the brakes. We do have a transfer track here that kind of goes off screen. I liked the queue. Curtis or Geewhizz did a lot of the queue line here for the most part. So kind of a cool entrance underneath the launch track, and then wrapping around the flying snake dive, and then also having this guy right out by the path. It was a pretty cool look for the whole thing. Same too with the supports, very intimate-esque supports. Had a lot of detail to them, and they took a while, but I think they certainly turned out overall. And then we did try and have some of the interesting details in there, like the bi-rail track for the brakes and the quad rail track for the launch, with the chain lift and everything there. So I think it turned out pretty well, and I like the station. It's just massive because at the time, without open, we were still working with the continuous circuit mode and making sure you could get enough of the train in there. It was a longer station than it needs to be, probably double what it needs to be. So it's massive, especially when you compare it to, that's too far, to the rest of the structures in the park. It's like double the size of the next biggest structure. But I like the ribbing that goes across the whole thing, and just a bit of the open air so you can see the different queue gates and everything, and then the checkerboards underneath. I did kind of like how this checkerboard fades its way out as you get to the building itself. But there was a criticism when this park came out that this little park has this giant intamin. How did they afford that? And that's a fair question. The way that I looked at this was similar to Holiday Park in Germany, that is and was a pretty small park at the time when they got Expedition G-Force, which ended up being one of the top-ranked coasters in the world for like a decade. So it was definitely a ride that was outside of their kind of park size. This scales a little bit more towards the fantasy realm, especially a launch coaster of this type, but I kind of still maintain that is valid. And while it's not a big park, it still kind of works okay. I mean, there's definitely a lot looking back at this that I would go back and change. We were up against Internet City, which, if you go look at that park, and we may review it at some point, was just an absolute massive pile of stuff. So much theming, so much kind of everything in there, a lot of stuff to look at. And honestly, I was a little bit staggered that we won. We won by, I think, one vote, maybe two. And it was definitely an upset at the time, and probably still would be. But I was kind of proud of what this did for the realism builders in the game, or at least on New Element, that really kind of got bolstered by that, and really worked to make the realism building into what it is today. And you got to start somewhere. And even though this one has its struggles, I think that was the biggest takeaway from this one. I mean, I can still be happy about some of the things, like still love that intimate layout, and I do still kind of like the look of some of these structures. Like, honestly, this looks like a nice building to me, and it feels fine. It wouldn't be the way that I build it now, but it feels good. And then just the landscaping and kind of placemaking of all this with the kind of the warm chocolatey browns and the Riverwalk type approach here with the pathways looking out onto the lake and everything. So I think there's still a lot of nice aspects to this. It's definitely under detailed and has some things that could easily be fixed. But for what it is, I think I can be happy with it and still proud enough for having built this, or at least helped build it. Probably a half and half effort from Geewhizz and I. So that's all there is for today. So this is a pretty quick one. Hope you enjoyed the park. I will post a download link for it once New Element comes back, which hopefully is any day now. So keep checking the description for it. If you have a park or a ride or a project under construction you'd like me to take a look at and review, either privately or publicly, send me a note, leave me a comment on the YouTube channel, and I will add it to the queue. We will continue with more hacking tutorials. I've got 3 of them queued up and ready to go. And then we've got even more on the way. So thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed the park, and have a great day.